You don't make women chase by saying more. You do it the moment your emotions stop reaching outward for approval. Most men think attraction is built through effort, words, reassurance, presence. But the men women pursue operate from a different place entirely. They're quiet, not because they're hiding, but because nothing inside them is unsettled. When your emotional world is ordered, something subtle happens in hers. She feels it before she understands it. Curiosity replaces certainty. Attention turns inward. And without realizing it, she begins moving toward you. This isn't about ignoring women. It's about emotional self-command. What happens when your calm no longer depends on her response? If you've ever noticed that the less reactive you became, the more interest seemed to rise, you're already sensing the truth beneath the surface. And if this kind of clarity speaks to you, take a second to like the video, subscribe, or leave a comment so this message reaches other men who are done chasing and ready to understand. Because what you're about to hear isn't dating advice. It's the psychological principle that quietly governs attraction, power, and respect. Don't move. The real shift and why it changes everything comes next. You were taught, explicitly or indirectly, that emotional expression is strength, that transparency creates connection, and that explaining yourself is how misunderstandings dissolve into intimacy. It sounds reasonable, almost virtuous, and for a long time you believed it because you wanted it to be true. But watch what actually happens, not in theory, not in intention, but in lived experience. Each time you explain yourself, something imperceptible shifts beneath the interaction. Your words don't land as clarity the way you expect them to. They land as weight. Your reassurance doesn't calm the dynamic. It introduces movement where stillness once existed, and that movement quietly invites testing. You feel it before you can name it, a subtle imbalance that tells you you're leaning forward emotionally while something in her begins to lean back. So you adjust. You choose your words more carefully. You reveal more sincerity. You add context, hoping that precision will restore equilibrium. But the distance you sense isn't created by a lack of explanation. It's created by emotional leakage, by the quiet transfer of your internal stability outward in the hope that it will be received and returned. Emotional silence is not the absence of feeling. It is the absence of spillover. It is what happens when your inner world is so ordered that it no longer needs to be narrated to remain real. When you stop broadcasting your emotional state, your presence begins to change, not dramatically, not theatrically, but in a way that alters the atmosphere around you. When you no longer rush to be understood, the space between moments thickens. Conversations slow, not because you are withholding, but because you are no longer chasing resolution. Silence becomes breathable. Your pauses stop feeling like gaps and start feeling like gravity, and without trying to, you begin to occupy more psychological space simply by being settled where you stand. Most men never notice the precise moment this shift occurs. They only recognize its effects after the fact. She begins asking questions she never asked before, not out of anxiety, but curiosity. Her messages stretch longer, not louder. Her tone doesn't become warmer or colder. It becomes more attentive, as if she's listening not just to your words, but to the steadiness beneath them. This is not mystery, and it is not manipulation. It is contrast. You live in a world saturated with emotional noise, men explaining themselves, performing sincerity, trying to manage perception rather than mastering their inner state. When you don't participate in that noise, your calm registers immediately, not as dominance over her, but as command over yourself. And self-command is processed instinctively, long before it is understood intellectually. You don't need to signal it or demonstrate it. It shows itself in how you pause before responding, in how you don't rush to correct misunderstandings to soothe your ego, and in how you allow silence to exist without filling it to protect your sense of worth. Silence, when backed by inner order, removes predictability, not in a chaotic way, which repels, but in a way that keeps perception open and unresolved. When everything about you is not immediately available, The mind begins to lean in, not out of insecurity, but because unfinished perception demands attention. Her focus does not fixate on you directly. It turns inward, replaying moments, reconsidering tone, sensing something unresolved, and instinctively investing energy to understand it. This is where most men misinterpret what's happening. They believe women chase silence itself, so they withdraw, disappear, or withhold emotionally, mistaking absence for strength. And it fails every time, because hollow silence feels empty, and emptiness unsettles rather than attracts. What works is containment. You still feel deeply. You still desire. You still engage fully. But you are no longer emotionally dependent on being understood in the moment. And that trust in your own center allows meaning to emerge without force. When you stop doing the emotional labor of holding the interaction together, something subtle but decisive happens. Without consciously choosing to, she begins doing more of it herself. Not chasing you physically, not pursuing you overtly, but seeking clarity, alignment, and the grounded emotional field she feels when she's near you. This is where attraction quietly shifts from pursuit to pull, because you are no longer trying to be chosen, you are already composed. And that composure becomes the axis around which everything else begins to turn. Stay here, because the next layer reveals why this dynamic has nothing to do with dating, and everything to do with power, identity, and the moment a man becomes internally unmovable. The moment a man becomes internally unmovable, the world does not announce it, but it responds. Power, in its truest form, never enters a room loudly. It rearranges the emotional field quietly, the way gravity bends space without asking permission. This is why emotionally silent men are so often misunderstood, even by those who feel drawn toward them, because what they carry is not charisma in the theatrical sense, but coherence, an inner alignment that does not fluctuate with external reaction. Most men live slightly outside themselves. Their attention leans forward, tethered to outcomes, scanning for signs of approval or rejection, calibrating their emotional posture in real time based on how they are received. This outward orientation creates a subtle dependency, and dependency, no matter how well disguised, always leaks. It leaks through tone, timing, and the almost imperceptible urgency beneath words that are meant to sound calm. When you withdraw that dependency, not from her but from the outcome itself, the psychological center of gravity shifts. You are no longer managing the interaction, you are inhabiting yourself. And the moment you do, something important happens in her perception. The interaction stops feeling like an exchange and starts feeling like an encounter. Encounters carry weight because they are not transactional. They are not driven by reassurance seeking or emotional bargaining. They unfold on their own terms, and when a man no longer rushes to stabilize the emotional temperature of the room, the responsibility for interpretation subtly migrates. She begins to listen more closely, not because you demand attention, but because your calm refuses to compete. This is where emotional labor quietly changes hands. In most dynamics, men perform emotional labor without realizing it. They explain intent, smooth over tension, anticipate discomfort, and preemptively resolve uncertainty, believing this creates safety. But safety born of constant emotional intervention does not deepen attraction, it dulls it, because nothing is allowed to breathe long enough to become meaningful. When you stop intervening emotionally, not out of coldness but out of trust in your own stability, uncertainty is allowed to exist. And uncertainty, when it is not threatening, becomes fertile ground. It invites curiosity, interpretation, and investment, not because she feels anxious, but because her mind senses something solid enough to lean toward without collapsing. This is the Machiavellian layer most men never see, because it does not involve strategy. Machiavelli understood that power does not come from control, but from independence, the kind that renders control unnecessary. A man who does not need to steer perception gains influence precisely because he is not trying to. Your emotional silence communicates something deeper than restraint. It signals that your inner state is not up for negotiation. You are not persuading her to feel a certain way. You are not shaping yourself to fit the moment. You are allowing the moment to reveal itself against the backdrop of who you already are. And that is where projection begins. When emotional information is sparse but grounded, the mind fills in the gaps, not with fantasy, but with meaning. She begins to project depth, stability, and intentionality onto you, not because you manufactured mystery, but because your behavior is congruent with inner order. Projection is not deception. It is the psyche's way of completing patterns that feel coherent but unfinished. This is why emotionally silent men often appear more self-assured than they consciously feel. Their containment creates a canvas, and the human mind cannot resist completing what feels structurally sound. The more internally settled you are, the less you need to explain yourself, and the more your presence becomes interpretable rather than explicit. Here is where dark psychology is often misunderstood. It is not about exploiting this process, because exploitation collapses coherence. The moment a man tries to use silence as a lever, his inner instability returns and the field changes again. What works is not the behavior, it is the absence of need behind the behavior. Need distorts perception. It accelerates speech, shortens pauses, and infuses meaning with urgency. When need disappears, time stretches, responses slow. Words land heavier because fewer of them are required to convey intent. This temporal shift alone is enough to alter how you are experienced, because humans instinctively associate unhurried presence with authority. Authority does not ask to be believed, it is felt. This is why emotionally silent men are often described as grounded rather than exciting at first glance, yet become increasingly compelling over time. Excitement spikes quickly and fades just as fast. Grounding accumulates. It builds trust not through reassurance, but through consistency of being. And consistency creates safety without sacrificing polarity. Attraction, at its deepest level, is not sparked by novelty alone, but by the rare combination of safety and tension, of calm that does not collapse into predictability. Emotional silence preserves this balance because it prevents premature emotional closure. Nothing is rushed, nothing is forced, and nothing is over-explained into insignificance. You are no longer performing a role. You are occupying a position. And from that position, pursuit does not feel like chasing. It feels like orientation. She's not moving toward you because you pulled her in, but because your steadiness provides a reference point her nervous system recognizes as stable. In a world of emotional fluctuation, stability becomes magnetic, not loudly, not dramatically, but inevitably. Stay with this, because the final layer reveals the cost of this posture, the responsibility it places on you, and why true emotional silence is not a tactic to be used, but a state to be earned. The responsibility most men never anticipate is that emotional silence, once real, removes every familiar excuse. When you no longer react impulsively, you can no longer blame circumstance, provocation, or misunderstanding for the way you move through the world. Your inner order becomes visible, not through performance, but through consistency, and with that visibility comes accountability to yourself. This is the cost of becoming internally unmovable. You are no longer carried by momentum or emotional surges. You must choose your actions deliberately, knowing they will echo longer because fewer of them are made. Silence backed by discipline sharpens consequence. Every word carries intent. Every absence of reaction communicates decision. There is nowhere to hide behind emotional noise because you are no longer generating any. Most men resist this stage because it feels exposed. Without emotional excess, there's nothing to distract from who you are when stripped of explanation. Yet this exposure is precisely what stabilizes identity. When your internal state is governed rather than reactive, your sense of self stops fluctuating with external validation, and attraction, whether romantic, professional, or social, becomes a secondary effect rather than a pursuit. This is where Stoic mastery quietly intersects with power. Not power over others, but power over orientation. You stop asking what will secure approval and begin asking what aligns with your values, your timing, and your long-term coherence. That shift alone reorganizes how you are perceived, because people instinctively respond to those who move from principle rather than pressure. Women, in particular, are acutely sensitive to this distinction. They do not respond to silence as a signal. They respond to the psychological structure that silence reveals. When a man's emotions are contained rather than suppressed, when the pauses in his speech are inhabited rather than empty, and when his calm persists regardless of outcome, something fundamental is communicated. His center does not reside outside himself. This is the final truth, most never articulate. Women do not chase emotionally silent men because silence is attractive. They move toward them because emotional order feels rare, grounding, and unmistakably self-sourced. In a world where attention is fragmented and validation is traded reflexively, inner stability becomes a form of wealth, and proximity to it feels clarifying rather than consuming. At this stage, attraction ceases to be the objective. You are no longer managing dynamics, you are embodying a state. Some women will lean in, others will drift away, and neither outcome destabilizes you, because your composure is no longer contingent on being chosen. That neutrality is not indifference, it is freedom. And freedom alters everything. It changes how you speak, how you listen, and how you decide when to engage and when to remain still. It removes urgency from your interactions and replaces it with intention. The chase dissolves, not because you engineered distance, but because you stopped abandoning your center to close it. This is why emotional silence cannot be learned as a technique. It emerges when a man has ordered his inner world enough that he no longer needs to announce it. The silence is simply the byproduct. The gravity is the proof. If you've followed this far, you already feel the shift, not as excitement, but as a quiet settling. That is the point. This understanding isn't meant to motivate you. It's meant to orient you. Because when a man becomes internally composed, attraction stops being something he seeks and becomes something that recognizes him. And once that happens, the question is no longer why women chase emotionally silent men, but whether you are willing to become one.